December 22, 1819. The Geneva Gazette, Geneva, New York. Singular fact. Tabor Chadwick has written the editor of the New York Evening Post that an insane person, whose name is Russel Colvin, came to Shrewsbury from 5 to 10 years ago from Manchester, Vermont, and that he is still living in that town. This is believed to be the man for whose supposed murder the two Mr. Bournes were sentenced to be hung at Manchester about this time, the punishment of one whom was committed to confinement in the state prison by the legislature. Chadwick's letter affords strong evidence that the Bournes are innocent men so far as relates to the supposed murder of Colvin. December 29, 1819. Geneva Gazette, printed and published on Wednesdays by James Bogart at his printing office, bookstore, and bindery in Geneva, New York. From the Evening Post, December 16. The Vermont Murder. Our readers will recollect that several articles have been extracted into this paper concerning the late trial and condemnation of two men, Stephen and Jesse Bourne, in Vermont, for the supposed murder of a Mr. Russel Colvin, who mysteriously disappeared from Manchester in that state several years since. An advertisement was published in behalf of the unhappy convicts a short time after their sentence, requesting information of the supposed deceased, if he should yet be alive. This advertisement produced the letter of Mr. Chadwick of Shrewsbury, New Jersey, published in the Evening Post of the 10th. We now feel a pleasure in announcing that the information contained in that letter is correct, that the said Russel Colvin is not only alive, but arrived in this city at Mr. Welpley's Inn, corner of Cortlandt and Greenwich Streets, last evening. Mr. Colvin, it seems, came to the house of William Polhamus in Dover, Monmouth County, New Jersey, in March or April 1813, in a partial state of derangement, and has continued to reside there ever since. And in consequence of the letter of Mr. Chadwick, he has now been brought to this city by Mr. Welpley, who was well acquainted with Mr. Colvin and family in Vermont. He will continue in company with Mr. W., and it is hoped that his friends in Vermont will lose no time in taking him to his home and family. With what joy will the miserable convicts, who are even now, though innocent, expecting an ignominious death, hail the return of their long-lost neighbor! How thankful will they be for this peculiar dispensation to that Providence who watches over the lives of men. We should like much to know some particulars relative to the trial of the Bournes, and upon what testimony they were convicted. We have, it is true, recently seen a marvelous story of a still more marvelous dream, by means of which it has been said the murder was discovered and the murderers detected. But we can hardly believe any 12 men in this age of reason and intelligence could be found so superstitious as to condemn a fellow being to a gibbet upon such incompetent testimony. At all events, this case should be a warning to jurors to weigh well the testimony in capital cases before they pronounce the awful sentence of guilty. January 19, 1820. The Geneva Gazette, Geneva, New York. The Vermont Yeoman. The Vermont Yeoman states that it is reported that some inhuman relation of the Bournes had suborned a Mr. Merrill, the person who related Jesse Bourne's confession to the court, to testify falsely in order to have them hung, that he might come in possession of their property. Merrill is said to have suddenly disappeared on hearing that Colvin was alive. Where the mystery of this transaction is to end, time can only determine. Albany Advocate. February 16, 1820. The Geneva Gazette, Geneva, New York. Case of Russel Colvin. Copy of a letter from a highly respectable member of the bar at Bennington, Vermont, to his friend in New York, dated December 27, 1819. Dear Sir, in answer to yours of the 16th, I have to inform you that the trial of the case you allude to, and all the proceedings therein, will soon be published, and I can then accommodate you, but it is out of my power at present to give you a full and correct statement of all the evidence had in the case, etc. Russel Colvin married a daughter of a Mr. Bourne and lived in his family until he absconded, which was in the year 1812. The last information they had of him, he went into a field to work with Jesse and Stephen Bourne. As he had not been heard of for a number of years, Jesse and Stephen were strongly suspected of having murdered him. At last they were apprehended and confined for trial, and after being confined a while, and everyone telling them they must suffer, and they being ignorant of their situation, and without friends, they were so wrought upon that they despaired themselves, and undertook to introduce fraud into their defense, which you know is often done in such cases, though this is of an uncommon kind. The first plan suggested was thus. Jesse says to Stephen, "We shall all be hung, and I believe we had better send and get the old man," meaning their father, "to come and confess that he killed Colvin, and they may pardon him, he being an old man." And accordingly, they sent for him, and made the proposition to him that he should confess the murder, and save them and the family. The old gentleman readily told them that he could not accede to their proposal, for he was not guilty. Jesse then proposed to Stephen that they should themselves confess the crime. Stephen told him he would go his halves, but Jesse was too cowardly, and after repeated solicitations, Stephen made up his mind to take it upon himself and save the lives of the rest of the family, being strongly impressed with the belief that they must all suffer death. Accordingly, he made a confession in writing that he killed Colvin in the field and buried him, and that his brother Jesse saw him do it, although he did not assist him, and related all the circumstances, that he dug the body up 18 months after the murder and put it under a barn, which shortly after was burnt, and that was the way the bones were destroyed. Jesse confessed he saw his brother commit the act, and from these confessions they were both convicted of the murder of Colvin. It is now ascertained, however, that they are both innocent, and that Colvin went off privately and was never heard from until Mr. Chadwick gave the information in a New York paper. But few believed it until Colvin himself arrived in Manchester, which was announced by the firing of cannon, and the people assembled in immense numbers to see the man they really supposed had been murdered many years. You can more easily imagine than I can describe the feelings of the Bourne family and their connections, which they must have experienced on such an event. It has made a very considerable excitement in the minds of the people in this quarter of the country, and I presume that courts and juries with us will in future be more cautious in their convictions. Respectfully, etc. In addition to the above, we learn from the Rutland Herald that the corporation of the city with much liberality advanced the money to convey Colvin home. He arrived at Manchester on Wednesday, the 23rd. Stephen Bourne was immediately set at liberty. 50 guns were fired in testimony of the public joy, the first of which was discharged by Stephen Bourne. Jesse Bourne was in the state prison, but was immediately to be released. A report of the trial is published at Rutland. New York Columbian.